The science of murder, the analysis of dangerous new psychedelic drugs, and the fingerprints and trace evidence left behind by suspects at crime scenes are just some of the topics that I'm going to be discussing with a panel of forensic science investigators later this month. And you can come along for free. A special public event to celebrate 50 years of Forensic Science Ireland is going to take place at the National Convention Centre in Dublin on May 28th. The doors are at 6 p.m. and tickets are available now on eventbrite.com. Don't miss it.
So we're going to talk about Forensic Science Ireland and your day there. I asked you what happened and what's it all about so I could prepare for this podcast, and you told me, just ask me about my day.
That's it. And we discussed how our preparation for some of our Crime World episodes it's so vast. It's actually, somebody could study it.
Yeah, they could.
As,
winging it, how to do it.
Yeah.
You could do life hacks, wing everything.
We should get a consultant in. Yeah, no, so I just didn't want to tell you anything until I was talking to you with everyone else listening.
Yes.
I could have rang you, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Because I just thought I'll save it for everyone. When everyone's sitting down, be they on their headphones or in front of their screens on YouTube, whatever they are.
So it's like a mystery. It's like it's like having a cliffhanger.
It was one of the best days of my life.
So what we know
in recent years, I'm going to say, because it felt like it was Christmas morning.
So what I know so far, you visited Forensic Science Ireland, and at some point last week you got, was it your DNA?
No, I didn't get it done last week. I got it done yesterday.
Yesterday, right?
Yeah,
and I hope
you don't listen to me.
No, I do, and I know you've talked to a lot of scientists, and you've a very in-depth knowledge of scientific matters. I would say
I'm not bad.
Not bad.
I have an offspring studying science.
You do, which is impressive in of itself. And
get my genes.
No. So, well, tell us what happened.
So, now the reason I went out to Forensic Science Ireland, to their new building, now it's new, but they've been in it since about a year and a half and moving everything into it. It's just outside Selbridge in Kildare. And the reason I went out there is because they're holding this big conference in Dublin, which seems to be like the World Cup of forensic science, that you actually have to apply for to hold it. And it's really prestigious that Ireland have got it.
Yeah.
And it's on in the Convention Centre. And next Wednesday, which is May 28th, there's a panel of 4 of them who are going to take to the stage to discuss the murders they've solved, how they've, I won't say solved, but they've been involved in helping to solve, giving evidence to court about the drugs they sample, about the work they do out there in FSI and how it's developed in the last 50 years, because it's 50 years going.
Like Forensic Science Ireland is it's a state body that sort of functions independently, I suppose, and provides...
Yeah, I think it's sort of emerged out of... Actually, I'll tell you where exactly it emerged. It emerged out of the late Dr. Jim Donovan and his work. And he seemed to have been working as a forensic scientist with the Garda Síochána, and then this lab set up.
Yeah.
And there is a timeline for all this. I'd rather get it right than wrong, to be honest with you. But basically, he was the first and the only forensic scientist at one stage working with the guards. And when he sort of started working, he was working with,
fingerprints and things like that, I presume there wouldn't have been DNA, I think.
No, there was all sorts of things. There was like trace evidence, which could have been, taking pieces of glass and linking it to a suspect in a case, taking
ballistic
traces of paint and things from crime scenes maybe, and trying to look at the No Long case, and actually that series, which is called The Beast on our Crime World Presents, I think it's the first one of the Crime World Presents line. Dr. Sheila Willis is interviewed on that, and she worked on that case.
Yeah.
And she and her colleagues took samples from the car in which No Long had sort of kidnapped Nora Sheehan and kept them in a lab, to the extent that 40 years on, when the coldest murder case in Ireland was before the courts, that material was still robust enough to form part of the evidence chain against him.
And that was...
which resulted in his conviction for murder.
And which was things like, wasn't it, paint from the car?
Paint, exactly,
there were some carpet fibres.
Yeah, yeah.
But obviously...
So it's developed over the years, and I suppose really, and to say about the event on May 28th in the convention centre, and I think the best part of this is it's free.
Yeah.
So anybody can go online to that eventbrite.com website and get a ticket for it. And you don't get to sit down with these people and hear what they have to say very often. Like, they are working in a very secure environment. Their work is so interesting, and they're going to be talking basically, as I said, all about their work and really what the kind of work into the future is. Ireland has invested 100 million in this Forensic Science Ireland new building, which is stunning. And it has this... Okay, I'll start at the beginning. So I drive out, okay?
Yeah, okay.
And I get to the gates and yesterday morning, and there's... you can't just drive into the building. You can't just rattle up to FSI. It's so secure because of what they're doing in there. Members of the public aren't allowed in. Very, very few people have had tours, which is why I was so excited.
Yeah.
And so you give your name, they're awaiting you up at the building. So I was instructed where to drive and where to leave my car. You get into reception, and the first thing I'm met with is a really nice receptionist, really friendly, but forms about how I'm going to have to give my DNA.
Right, okay.
Now, I was told this in advance and was asked, was I okay with it? It's a kind of strange question to be asked when you're going visiting somewhere. Do you mind giving your DNA? Are you okay with that? You'd have to enter the building. And I kind of thought, haven't murdered anyone recently, so yes, I have no problem giving my DNA. But of course, the reason is that you leave traces of your DNA behind you everywhere you go.
This is for if you contaminate, I suppose, in some ways, like some tests, your DNA pops up.
Yeah, so you have to be eliminated as being kind of, you're given your form. The DNA, anyway, you go through into the actual building, and the first port of call is a room where you sit down, a little bit like where we get our injections, our vaccines and stuff. And I'm given a swab, explained to why my DNA has been taken and how it's basically only going to be used for this matter and will be stored securely. So it's not like I'm giving my DNA and they can
put it on a database,
throw it through any kind of investigation that's going on. See, was she involved in this, that and the other? It's not like that. It's for access to the building. And it's a legislative requirement. So it's to eliminate samples from visitors or anybody who's in there. Presumably all of the staff have theirs done, and if you get a job, if you're lucky enough to get a job in this place, you'd have to do the same. So you get a thing like a giant big sort of lollipop made of cotton wool, for want of a better way of, and your DNA swabs are inside your cheek, so you swab each side of the cheek, and then they have this piece of paper with the sticky thing on the top of it, and they put where you've swabbed down on that, and the colour changes on this sort of circular area. It's like a little square of, it's not paper, it's obviously chemicals and stuff that they put through a machine then. So it's like putting a little credit card through a machine with my DNA on it.
Yeah.
And it will presumably create a DNA profile, and they'll store that there for elimination from any criminal investigations they may be involved in or have to give evidence in. I've never given my DNA before.
No, I can't think I have. I mean, I've had swabs taken for medical tests. Yeah, like I've never had that experience.
I was kind of half sorry that it didn't double up with they'd come back to me and let me know my genealogical line.
Like you had a killer, a sixth cousin was a killer back in the 1800s.
Because that would be interesting, do you know, when you'd get one of those. And actually we did end up talking about that along the tour, because in the DNA, so there's 4 kind of areas, and the buildings area is beautiful. It was designed by OPW. It reminded me slightly of the new Vincent's building, which is light-filled and pretty nice place to sit in the public areas. And I was told that basically when this was designed, because they're kind of dealing with such dark matters, the people who are working there, the lab technicians and all the rest of it, that they wanted the public areas to be a place where they could, see nature. So everywhere you look in the public areas, there's beautiful windows and beautiful trees all surrounding it. And there's a sort of a canteen area in the middle of it, which again is filled with light and artwork and all this sort of oak wood furniture, which is beautiful. So that's it. But it's designed as a St. Bridget's cross, I think I was told.
Okay.
So there's 4 different areas of it. One of them was for the DNA. One of them was for the fingerprints are still really important.
Yeah.
And within that same area, and there's another area where they analyse writing and documents.
Right.
So that would be for cases of frauds, for wills, for that kind of thing. And you remember the story that popped up on the Joe Duffy about the poison pen letters?
Yes.
That woman who had received hundreds of them. They would have come in to FSI for analysis. That's more visual work still. Like the naked eye is still probably one of the most powerful tools.
Yeah.
Looking into a microscope, obviously trying to work out how somebody, develops the letter B. We all do things differently in the letters of the alphabet. Our writing does develop from childhood, but you eventually end up with a sort of a signature ultimately.
Yeah.
So it's trying to match that. The fingerprinting, which was first used in a courtroom in 1901, is still a really significant sort of fight against crime. And there's loads of things brought in that, they'll seek fingerprints from. There's these machines basically, and you put the fingerprint material into them and they boil glue at a certain temperature. And for some reason, the boiled glue particles stick to, they think, the sweat from the fingerprint or whatever. And that creates this unique
picture, basically, yeah.
And it's not like everybody in the world we know this, everybody in the world has unique fingerprints, but like nobody has ever proved that 2 people have a similar fingerprint. But all the billions of people in the world, is it amazing?
It is.
Your fingerprints develop in the womb.
Yeah.
And now I'll get lost here. This is a bit scientific for me, but there's like tongues and grooves on them and you can sort of feel them yourself, can't you?
Yeah.
But fingerprints pop up on everything from drugs to, masks maybe used in hits.
Yes, I think we had a fingerprint on one of the masks. Wasn't it used, or was it a DNA used in the Michael Barr shooting?
That shooting was particularly, worked
forensically
on by
based.
Forensic, because there was a Freddy Krueger mask that had been dropped by Eamon Cumberton, actually, who ultimately was convicted of the murder. Fingerprints can last. There's different types of material. There's non-porous materials, which would be like your plastic bottle and plastics and stuff like that. Then there's porous materials, which would be what?
I don't know, like
I can't remember what
like
that is now.
Cardboard or something like that. Yeah, paper.
So they have different machines for the porous and non-porous lifting of fingerprints. And then they have this whole big wall of where all those fingerprints are stored.
Yeah.
We still do usually 5 fingerprints. They have an area in Forensic Science Ireland, which is also where there's missing people, family members. So somebody might have gone missing some time ago. I think there was a case in Wales where there was a body found, but they helped because relatives of a missing person had voluntarily gone to them and given DNA, which can be really helpful if you have, for example, somebody who's missing who maybe only has a few living relatives who are kind of getting elderly. So they can give their DNA. It's stored securely and only obviously used if there was a situation where there was a body found.
In that case you were talking about, the DNA was shared with permission with the UK authorities because sometimes, very tragically, because of the Irish Sea is quite small.
Yeah.
So, but a body can move from Wales to Ireland and wash up on a shore of a different country. And in this case, I think you're talking about, they agreed to share it, and obviously the family agree, and they were able to solve it.
Identify them.
Yeah.
And they do like to say that they provide that service for the public. And, it is a very secure, and people can phone up. People who have a missing relative can phone up and make sure that DNA is there.
Yeah.
That it can be checked if body parts or is found.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a very valuable service for people in that position. What'll I tell you about next? Interesting. So the DNA can be taken from loads of different things.
Yeah.
But also from bones, DNA can be extracted.
Yeah.
So, but only small particles of remains will be brought to the FSI lab. So you don't see a full
body
basically coming in. Because the service is 50 years old, they have the old logbooks that were once used. So Gardaí will be investigating cases all over the country, and they will bring their exhibits, whether they want fingerprint analysis. With the drugs, it's very much, we'll talk about this in a minute because this is really interesting about the drugs, but they're looking to prove that they are an illegal substance, essentially. And also the purity of them would be of interest, so they can value then a seizure they have.
Yeah.
But everything comes nowadays through this same system, which is almost like, it's part of the building that's almost like, I'd say, checking in at an airport, right? So you'll come up and the Gardaí will give their samples and in their evidence bags nowadays. They're taken in, it's all computerized immediately. But they showed me the old logbooks where people used to have to physically write out each exhibit that came in, and just on the page that was opened is 1978.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I mean, as you said, the No Long case, the careful archiving of that stuff.
Yeah.
It really stood to them. And obviously there was a very different scenario in the Ian Bailey case where exhibits weren't looked after properly. I think everybody accepts that, in particular a gate. And that really impacted on the further investigation into it. So
yeah. The drugs, because that would interest us, obviously. So I was brought to the place where they store the exhibits. So again, obviously, if there's a massive big seizure of drugs, they don't bring them all in. They take samples. So the scientists can go to the crime scene and, oversee and make sure a kind of a valid sample.
They probably take a random sample, do they? Not just once. They probably take a few of them.
They probably take a few of them from different agreed sort of areas. Say you have a big block of cocaine that's come in or something. They will take them. They bring them back to the lab, they store them, and then they'll run them through machines which come up with the content of them. Like, I mean, obviously a lot of cocaine is still coming in, but really interesting on this new head shop stuff.
Yeah.
The psychoactive drugs.
Psychoactive
drugs. They're seeing more and more of them. A lot of nitrazine is coming in. They haven't seen so much fentanyl, which we've spoken about here. Fentanyl is widely used in the US and has actually got like a tiny, tiny, tiny particle of it is used in medical environments for pain relief, but it's become a street drug. It's been made largely by the Mexicans and shipped into the US, where are we talking 100,000 deaths a year from it? It's so
huge.
easy to overdose on it.
Yeah.
This nitrazine is similar enough, but it seems to be what they're seeing in the systems here, or in the drugs here. Now, there was a couple of incidents that we can relate to, because there was the prison overdoses. And then, do you remember was it last summer? I remember coming into the office and seeing an alert on the road up around Stillorgan. And what happens with those alerts is there's various different organisations involved. There's the Health Service Executive, there's the Gardaí, but Forensic Science Ireland are also involved in that, because if they see a substance that they know to be hugely dangerous to a human being, essentially, they will alert this central alert system, and they're now putting those sort of amber alerts up on the roadways.
Yeah, they put them in places where the people who are likely to be using these drugs can find them. They have, and so that, the overdoses don't happen. And there have been a lot of successes, actually, where people have been in emergency situations and they've availed of those numbers, and the emergency service have been able to respond. But we have seen nitrazine, once it got into the prison system, that it's very, very lethal, very, very dangerous. There have been tragic deaths, but there's also been people who've just barely survived. So it's, it's degree.
They get into Portlaoise and it was a nightmare, because then it's so difficult, because it's a high security prison, to get the prisoners out into the hospital environment, and they have to be, obviously managed in that situation as well. I think law enforcement believe that when this is discovered in the drug network, that instead probably, and unfortunately, of the polydrug users going, oh, well, I won't take anything for the moment because it might kill me. They're living on a different kind of, they're living with addiction, so they will take a risk, really, won't they? It's sort of believed that it is the suppliers that pull it back out of the market.
Yeah, I think as well, like obviously it's not being sold as nitrazine on the streets.
No, not at all.
So people don't, even if they have a desire to avoid nitrazine, it's just like who knows how they're getting it or what they're being told they're about to take. And that's obviously the huge risk as well of the fact that you can't, because they're street drugs, you don't know what quantity is in anything at all.
Yeah, and really, I mean, it's this, we're actually 100%, and I know there's been some articles about it recently. I think Lynn Kelleher wrote something in last week about it, but we're back to this head shop time. So it's a lot of stuff is coming in to Forensic Science Ireland from vape shops and from, there can be raids or else they're testing it. What's happening is it's this HHC is the big thing at the moment, and legislation is slow to catch up to make that an illegal drug. So it isn't illegal.
No.
And yet it's a psychoactive drug that can have very bad effects on people. There's doctors around the country talking about sort of this psychosis developing in some users that are ending up in A&E all over the country. But what happens is they find this substance, and like, now this is where I failed chemistry, by the way.
Nice.
Failed.
Okay.
Like, it was like if people talk to me and I don't understand them, I just think it's like leaving cert chemistry. But I'll try and explain it to you. There's an illegal substance that's made up of a chemical.
It's got a chemical structure.
Okay. Yeah. And say the structure looks like that. They'll just make it look like that. Well, so they just move a little chemical.
Which again doesn't work as well if you're listening on audio.
So they just change the shape is basically what I'm saying of the molecule.
Yeah.
And they change the shape just enough that it is an unrecognizable drug, which isn't covered by legislation and therefore isn't illegal.
Yeah.
But the drug gangs, I'm not talking about the ones on the streets. I actually said to them yesterday, do you think they employ scientists? Like, oh, absolutely. And they have for years. They have. And they can see that you'd have to be quite educated scientifically to be developing these sort of strange, different molecules but with the similar effects to the illegal drugs. So it's quite a complex thing to do. And they always reckon that the kind of the drug gangs and really the cartels we're talking here who would be doing this are 5-10 years ahead of this, of everyone, of legislation, because no sooner have they identified and sort of shut down one of these drugs than another one is back on the
scene. So, I mean, cannabis or cannabis products have an active ingredient called THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, whatever it is.
Try that again?
No, I'm going to have to look that up. So what is
Leave that in, NASA.
So, but anyway, it has the active product of THC, and that's been written into the legislation that
it's back to the letters now.
That it's.
Do you want me to Google it for you?
I'm going to Google it.
Google it. Find out.
THC.
Just because the big brain on me today, like, and I don't want you to.
So tetrahydrocannabinol. So that's the active ingredient, and that's written into the legislation. So HHC, they've just literally changed a slight bit of it, and then the government or some TD has to bring it up. It has to be added to the Misuse of Drugs Act, and then it becomes illegal. And that's actually what happened with the head shop legislation, if you remember it. There was this constant slight change of it, and even when something was banned, then another thing came in until they figure out a way to kind of ban it en masse. And one of the ways they've banned cannabis en masse is by using that THC, anything that contains that ingredient. So yeah, it's really, really hard to keep up.
Yeah.
And of course, any changes to legislation takes ages. We all know that.
Exactly. But they are sort of, they're working with the other agencies to sort of alert them to anything that they see in FSI that might be of interest to the police and all the rest of it. Now, I have to say, it's pretty cool. I'm sure it's pretty cool to work there, isn't it? Some of it is largely lab work.
Most of it, presumably, is it?
Well, some of it is, but most of it, presumably. But having said that, I think there's a push, and I know Dr. Sheila Willis is going to be on the panel, and she has spoken before about sort of pushing that the scientists are on the crime scenes with the Garda technical people as well, working sort of more alongside them out in the field. one of the scientists I was talking to yesterday was describing, how varied the job can be. 1 minute she's in a lab and she's testing and analysing a crack pipe,
Yeah.
which is the lowest part of the drug ladder, really,
Yeah.
isn't it? Somebody using a crack pipe, smoking crack, that is, you're talking really those poly drug users in addiction. And the next thing, she gets a phone call that there's been a big haul of what they think is cocaine found. Can she make her way onto the MV Matthew?
Yeah.
Where you get to see the other end completely of the scale, because of course that MV Matthew was loaded with
multi-ton. And of course, then we had the case, the famous Sinaloa cartel case in when crystal meth was seized in the port in Cork, and there was definitely a lot of analysis to do to find out what that was.
Yes.
Like, they certainly knew it was drugs, but I think initially came in as a sort of MDMA seizure, and then so that all of that would be an example of where they have to nail down what the substance is before the charges can be brought. I mean, presumably DNA is a huge part of their job as well now, is it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, DNA and fingerprinting really are the things that identify us in the world. Now, I was talking to Stephen Clifford about DNA, and he showed me around the labs there where that is conducted very, very sort of secure. It's like
contamination would be obviously the
like
risk. Would
going
it be?
into space age, you know what I mean? And there's every time something is tested, it's cleaned with a particular substance that makes sure there's no cross contamination at all. But I was asking him about really the genealogical advances that have been used in the US in particular. The Golden State Killer.
Yes.
So let me just get the details of this. Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. was this American serial killer, and who was believed to have committed 13 murders, wasn't identified until they decided to run a DNA sample they had from one of the victims or whatever through a genealogical website, at which point they got 2 hits, which were sort of distant cousins, basically. But they were able to trace the genealogy back up the tree and back down the tree till they identified a small few individuals that it could be, and then coupled that with sort of more standard policing practices where he lived, kind of that.
I think he was an ex-police officer, wasn't he, or something?
Officer.
So, I mean, presumably that would have...
But basically, you have 50% of your mother's DNA, 50% of your father's DNA.
Yeah.
When you get to a first cousin, they share 6% of your DNA.
Yeah.
A second cousin shares 3% of your DNA.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like an absolute, game of numbers once you get a piece of DNA to try and link.
Yeah.
But we don't use that in this country.
No.
And I don't think we use it in Europe. They did use it at Sweden and got into some trouble with it because of using it in legislation. US cops, I think, can investigate in ways that...
Yeah, they have much more different rules. I mean,
Exactly.
Europe is famously much stronger on privacy than the US would be. But I think even in Europe, some cases have come up where people did it themselves, basically put their own DNA in and indicated some stuff. But
by and large, we're not doing that yet.
No.
But I asked Stephen, do you think it would be of use, in the future? And I mean, I think anybody working in science, it's probably a no-brainer when you see a case solved, like a cold case solved, a killer identified through something which is seemingly simple enough that the machines can do to bring you back a couple of suspects to focus an investigation. I'm sure we're a long, long way off it, but
sure we are.
And he said Ireland would actually be, I said, maybe we're too small a country really for that. And he actually sort of suggested that Ireland would be perfect because we do have, small, people
sample
probably
size.
have, what would you have in total, first, second cousins, 50?
Yeah, but they probably all be in a sort of most likely still in Ireland.
Exactly.
So you wouldn't be tracing from people coming from 100 years of immigration. The other thing is as well, like if you look at some of at the moment, if somebody is arrested, they get to take, or convicted, they get to take a DNA sample, don't they?
Yeah.
So they then go on a DNA database, and then also people can be asked to give DNA. And of course, the Kerry Babies case was an example of that.
Absolutely, it was, and spoke about that. And that again was because the parents of the Kerry baby were identified. It would have been through a 50% of each parent DNA profile. And interestingly as well in that case, which brings us back to bones.
Yeah.
So that baby was exhumed, baby John.
Yeah.
To get the DNA profile. And the physical matter was still intact enough for that DNA profile to be extracted out of it. I mean, you're talking there, a newborn baby washed up on a beach 42 years ago.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah.
And when was the baby's body exhumed? Like many, many decades after that. And yet still what the remains facilitated a full DNA profile. It's incredible, like.
Yeah.
So it's, look, you know, as well, I started by talking to you there about Jim Donovan, Dr. Jim Donovan. And of course, remember, like, he is such a key person in the development of Forensic Science Ireland and our, you know, the development really of law enforcement and our ability to convict individuals for many heinous crimes. But he was, of course, really starting out his career when in 1982 he was blown up by Martin, the General Cahill.
That's right.
Who had recognised that science was going to become as big a problem to him as the Garda.
Yeah.
And basically, Dr. Donovan had been working on a case, a murder case. There was a man who had been, I think he had stumbled in on a burglar in his property and had been stabbed. And the investigation had been directed to as a suspect, the General's brother, Anthony. And there had been actually glass fragments at this property where the man had been killed, John Copeland, and they had been linked and matched along with fibres, I think it was, to shoes and clothing that had been worn by the suspect. So the trial went ahead. Now, it actually, he was acquitted for various reasons at trial, but it gave Martin Cahill a kind of an insight into how serious this evidence could be and how, you know, leaving his trace behind him was going to be a problem. So when we move on to when Cahill was due to go on trial for a robbery in Clondalkin, and I mean, when you actually put yourself back and think about Cahill, he was a Pablo Escobar of his time. He fought the state and all the pillars of it. He didn't only ridicule them in Mickey Mouse shorts outside the courts. He actually physically and plotted against the state. And he first of all tried to torch the forecourts in that instance. And he then targeted Dr. Donovan because he knew he was going to be a witness in his case. And there was a bomb placed under his car. And he was driving to work, and I think it was at Newlands Cross. The heat of the exhaust sort of ignited the bomb. It went up. And he had spoken in the past before he passed away last year about that moment. And he remembered it vividly throughout his life, about reaching down, about feeling the blood, about realising that something terrible was wrong. Of course, he was brought to hospital. He survived against the odds, but he lost a foot and he never had proper use of his legs, and he had other injuries there, pain all his life, I think he spoke about. But instead of actually silencing him, and he's a hero really in that world, he went straight back to work and he just built and built and expanded. And he was there for the opening of the new Forensic Science Ireland, before he passed away at the age of 80. And they are going to hold a sort of memorial for him out there over the summer, which is lovely. Anybody you speak to in Forensic Science Ireland has really, really fond memories of him, and he was always an advocate of the science and of the growth of that. But obviously, you know, with that investment of the 100 million, 100,000, you wouldn't get very far with, would you?
Yeah.
The 100 million, the state has recognised, you know, how important it is going forward, and there will be continued investment in it. But look, I'm not very interesting on it compared to the people who are going to be at this public event. And again, those tickets are on eventbrite.com under 50 years of forensic science. We're actually going to post the link on on all our social media sites. But the panel will be Dr. Edward Connolly, who's the Director of Science and Development, Dr. Stephen Clifford, who I spoke to about the DNA. He's the Principal Scientist, Mr. Rodney Lakes, who's a Team Manager from Drugs, and I'm going to be speaking to him at that public event all about these new drugs and where we're at with, and really, I mean, I do think any parent and probably young person or anybody who considers taking or knows somebody going in and buying these things should have an idea of what the risks are. Miss Amanda Lennon, who's a team manager of chemistry, and Dr. Sheila Willis, who's now retired, but was the Director General of Forensic Science Ireland and who worked on so many interesting murder cases, has had a fascinating career. So I'm going to just put them through their paces and I'm going to get them to talk about particular cases that I think will interest the public, that people can resonate with. Let's bring science to the public, I suppose, in any way we can.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating and people have got so much more used to it as well. I actually remember one of the first cases that came to court with DNA evidence and it was presented and ultimately it was a gangland murder and the jury didn't accept it because, you know, it was put to them by the defence, but you can't really rely on this. But people now, their opinion, their knowledge, maybe not their technical knowledge, but the understanding of these things has changed totally. And there's huge interest. And of course, there's been programs, was it Law and Order and CSI and these programs really.
Which of course are dramatisations.
They are.
Not quite the reality, but you know, it's interesting to open it up as well for young people who are either interested in science or studying it because there's great job opportunities there. I mean, what a fascinating job to have.
Yeah.
I reckon that they're pinned to the wall more often than not at a social event to be asked the details of what they do.
Maybe you go back and do chemistry yourself.
Oh, Jesus, no. I remember actually being, and my poor parents had paid for my education and then paid extra for these particular expensive grinds in chemistry. And I don't know what the hell they were doing, or had I lied about being interested in it? I have no idea. But I remember being about a few weeks away from the Leaving Cert. And by the way, I've never had a Leaving Cert dream because I never had any particular interest or worries about it. I just didn't really have a huge desire to you know, I totally get when people are trying to get points to get into a particular thing. I knew I was going to spoof for a living, so hey, what did I need? But anyway, I remember a couple of weeks before the chemistry, just sitting there and you know, when I'm bored, what happens to me?
You space out.
Spaced out. I was totally goofing off in the middle of the chemistry class. And I came to because somebody beside me put their hand up to ask a question. And I'm still looking at them that they had the intelligence to ask the question. I was like, oh, I am so goosed here.
That's funny when you realise, no, it's not gobbledygook to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. It's that moment of realisation that, oh, holy God.
Yeah.
I mean, all I could have done was draw the things, maybe remember the design of them, but I had no idea what was in anything. So anyway, thank God so many other people have that skill set in life. So there you are. And it was really interesting. It was really, really good to see it. And I'm looking forward to next week as well.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.